You are listening to the Nature's Premier Podcast, episode 64. The many benefits of listening to classical music for children and adults. Here on the Nature's Premier Podcast, we talk about everything from bees to babies and sustainable living. Join us while we talk about natural parenting and different ways to live a more sustainable lifestyle for ourselves and our future generations to come. Now let's begin. Hey everyone, good morning and welcome back to another episode here on the Nature's Premier Podcast. I am your host, Brooke Nichols, and I am blessed to be back here with you all today. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode. Now, before we begin with today's episode, this episode of the podcast is sponsored by Nature's Premier Diaper Service, New York's cloth and compostable diaper service, providing families throughout Long Island and New York City with a healthier way to diaper their babies. Check them out at www.naturespremier.com to learn more. Now on to the show. Music. I definitely can't sing, and I can't play an instrument if my life depended on it, but I am a huge fan of music, and my favorite genre happens to be classical music. Now, I listen to music multiple times a day. I listen to it when I'm on the way taking my kids to school, picking them up, when I'm just running around doing errands, when I'm at the gym. Although I don't have a classical mix for the gym, I have a very eclectic mix, and I will not share that with you guys. But it gets me going, and it really does help, keep the gym movement up, right? Like it really does help with the momentum. Music is very powerful. It moves and sways you, regardless of what you're thinking or doing in your life. It can really uplift your mood, or it can really make a mood more dramatic. Music is very powerful, and there's just many different things that happen psychological and physically when you listen to music. Now, I will say that I've had many stages of being involved with different types of genres. I loved R&B music for a short period of time. I still have a lot of appreciation for it. I really loved rock and metal. I definitely had my Slipknot days in high school, but I really always loved classical music. I loved classical music from when I was a kid. It was actually introduced to me when I was very young from NPR, and it seemed to be the only type of music that I could get on a small radio that I had. So when I was around 8 or 9 years old, I would just listen to classical music, and I would always hide it from my siblings, my brothers and sisters, because I thought they would make fun of me. And I definitely was made fun of in school for liking classical music. But it's something that I always loved, and it was always the rock of who I was. That style of music was just so me. And it has taken me into adulthood, and I've only learned of more composers. I've only learned more about the many benefits of music, classical music in particular. So that's why today I wanted to talk about the many benefits of classical music. Now, there have been so many studies done in this whole genre of classical music and how it affects brain waves and activity. And I wanted to talk about one study before we actually jump into the benefits of classical music, because there is a lot of theory about this study, and there seems to be a heated debate for over 20 years about this study. There are some people in the camp that believe that there is no increase in brain activity or any type of IQ increase like this study had suggested. And they believe that classical music doesn't do anything other than just lift your mood and maybe make you enhanced in certain areas during that time. But there's no real definitive changes in your brain waves. Whereas the other camp, I happen to be more in this camp, believes that there is some serious benefits of music, of listening to classical music. And there are many time-tested and proven studies that show that there is a correlation between listening to classical music and increased brain activity, increased memory, boosting mood, helping anxiety. And there are several studies that we are going to be talking about today that do back that up. Now, because many families that listen to the podcast do have children, I think this is an important episode because it really does show you that what we expose our children to when they are young really does kind of shape who they are as they become older and they become mature adults. Now, one thing with classical music is, regardless of whatever camp you are on, whether you think it does nothing or whether you think it does a lot and has many benefits, the one thing that can be agreed is that it is a very positive type of habit to bring into one's life. We are exposed to so many different things subliminally, right? Like if we watch an ad for some kind of like advertisement for a product, we hear the music in the background. And, when we see that product, it kind of just brings back the music that we listen to, and it makes us feel a certain type of way. Marketers, researchers have been studying the way that we buy things, that we react to things for the last 30 years. So they actually know our habits better than we do. And so it's very interesting when you start to look into like what we're exposed to, how it makes us feel, how it makes us act, and what we expose our children to. So when you kind of when we expose our children to like a clean palate, regardless of where you live, regardless of where you come from, regardless of your family status, regardless of your economic status, whatever we expose our children to, that's what they're going to take with them as they get older. So if you're a parent that just really wants to, make your child less anxious and really try to help your kid move forward in life in a different lens than many other kids have, because there's a lot of kids that are just constantly on screens. They're constantly just taking in so many different things, so many different, behaviors that they see online or even in video games and things like that. If you really just want to give them a strong start, listening to these studies and listening to the many benefits of something as simple as classical music is something that's really going to open up your mind to what happens when our children are influenced by certain things, right? By music, by games, by videos, things like that. I mean, you really do see a correlation. And that's what makes these studies, especially as the years go on from this theory that I'm about to talk about, the Mozart theory, it makes you question a lot of what our children are exposed to. And when I say children, I don't even mean like toddlers. I'm even talking about students college age, even adults, right? Even as adults, I mean, we may not be growing anymore. I'm 31 years old. I'm about to be 32. So I know that I'm done growing. But I will say that I'm still influenced by things that I watch, by things that I listen to. There are things that I refuse to listen to that I maybe once had listened to. Like, for example, I used to be into like, my mom used to watch like these crazy like murder mysteries and stuff, and I just don't watch that stuff because it makes me feel very anxious. It gets me like in a negative mind frame. So it's a very different topic than like classical music, but just that alone, and like putting the two together, it really shows you that that does affect you, and it does, change your mind frame, change your mindset. So if you want to have, a strong start of the day, I think listening to something as pure as classical music, or even like nature sounds, or even nothing at all, and just listening to like the world around us, that's something that really does, clear our mind and make us less anxious, because as soon as you walk outside of your door, it's almost like a fight, right? You have traffic you got to deal with, you got the lights, especially if you live in New York City. Now, I'm on the island, so it's a little more of like country, so to speak. But even here, we have big cities. For those of you who live in like Los Angeles, California, you live in Denver, Colorado, like if you guys live in like these like cities, like these more city areas, you know exactly what I'm saying. So I just love classical music because it really does. I just feel like it just resets your mind. And I think it's important, especially when we're raising children, that we give our kids that time, to reset their mind, to get into more of a neutral state, to, control their feelings, to just be calm, right? To just be like calm and not, constantly heightened by stimulants or music or what have you. So sorry, that was a little bit of a rant, but I just wanted to talk about that real quick because for those of you who have listened to the podcast with author Richard Louv, I just feel like there's so many stimulants in our life, and I think classical music is a timeless way to really, revert back to more of a natural, calm state. Now, there was a very controversial study that was conducted back in 1993 by Dr. Gordon Shaw. And this was a study that he had coined the Mozart effect. Now, pretty much, the Mozart effect is a theory that listening to classical music will make you smarter. According to the Associated Press, Shaw became interested in brain theory in 1973 when he began researching the brain's capacity for spatial reasoning. Now, I might be saying that wrong. So for those of you who are listening, you're like, oh, come on, it's spatial. It's that kind of thing. So people use spatial reasoning in such activities as solving mathematical problems, playing chess, engineering, and science. Shaw and graduate Exidon Lang developed a model of the brain and used musical notes to represent brain activity. They were astonished to find that the overall sound resembled that of classical music. This is when Shaw decided to test the results of classical music on the brain. Shaw conducted his first studies on 3-year-olds and later studied the effects of classical music on college students. In 1993, he caught the media's attention when he reported that a group of college students had increased their IQs as much as 9 points as a result of listening to Mozart Sonata for Two Pianos in D Major. Wonderful piece. Shaw's groundbreaking results spawned a number of similar studies, one of which conducted in Wisconsin at Oshkosh, I always laugh at that, showed that preschoolers given piano lessons once a week scored 34% higher on spatial reasoning tests than those who didn't receive piano lessons. Now, this is a little bit different. I will say this is a different topic because there's many benefits, there's many proven benefits of teaching your children how to play an instrument at a young age, but that's separate from just listening to music. So I want this episode to be more about the benefits of listening to music. So this study might bring up, playing instruments, but I want this episode to be for all ages. I don't want it to just be catered to young children and, playing instrument lessons, because not everybody can give their kids, music lessons, or, they might not be interested in doing that. And I just want people to know that there are benefits of just listening to classical music. Now, aside from this study, the term actually was coined by Alfred A. Tomatis, who used Mozart's music as the listening stimulus in his work, attempting to cure a variety of disorders. So there have been many different studies aside from the Mozart effect, which pretty much is just, it's not just this one study, but it was this one study that started a whole whirlwind, right? A whole whirlwind of debate. And it just really grouped a lot of different studies that were promoting classical music in the development of children and adults. And it really just said that there was this whole theory that was around, Mozart's music that would really, heighten cognitive development. Furthermore, the approach has been popularized in Don Campbell's book, The Mozart Effect, which is based on an experiment published in Nature suggesting that listening to Mozart temporarily boosted scores on one portion of the IQ test. So as a result, the United States Governor Georgia Zeller Miller proposed a budget to provide every child born in Georgia with a CD of classical music. Now, it's very, very, very interesting. There's a lot of different studies. There's one other study I wanted to mention before we get into the actual benefits, which is a big benefit, but it's a study that came out. And that was actually back in 2008. And it's listening to classical music can relieve pregnancy stress. So we have many different studies we can cite in order to make this episode a little more digestible. I don't want to, go through the 15 that I found. But this one in particular was very, very, very interesting. And, pretty much it states that mothers-to-be who listen to lullabies, classical music, and sounds of nature are less likely to feel stressed about their pregnancy, a study has shown. The music's tempo was set at 60 to 80 beats per minute, the same as the human heart, and was found to ease anxiety and depression. Now, you're going to hear this a lot in different, benefits that I bring up. This is very fascinating because it all goes back to, how we were in utero. We hear our mother's heartbeat. That was very comforting. There's a tempo to that. And the fact that, classical music, in essence, it mimics that is really fascinating when you think about how the brain works and what it retains and how it soothes the mind and really does bring us to a state of calm. Scientists split pregnant women into two groups, with 116 given music CDs and 120 in the control group receiving normal pregnancy care. The women using the music received 4 CDs, each containing about 30 minutes of music. One CD featured lullabies, a second contained this classical music, a third included nature sounds, and a fourth played New Age crystal music, versions of Chinese nursery rhymes and songs, such as Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. The women were told to listen to at least one disc all the way through every day for 2 weeks. They could choose when they listened to the music, but had to record what they were doing at the time and which CD they chose. Most listened while they were resting, at bedtime, or carrying out chores. Widely used measuring systems were utilized to work on how women felt. The results showed that the music in the group were far less stressed, depressed, or anxious at the end of the study. Professor Xiangke Chen, who led the study at Kaohsiung Medical University in Taiwan, said that pregnancy is a unique and stressful period for many expectant mothers, and they suffer anxiety and depression because of the long time period involved. Our study shows that listening to suitable music, such as classical, provides a simple, cost-effective, and non-invasive way of reducing stress, anxiety, and depression during pregnancy. The women in the study published in the Journal of Clinical Nursing were between 18 and 34 weeks pregnant. Before the study, the women in the music group scored 17.44 in the perceived stress scale, which ranges from 0 to 30 and is used to measure the perception of stress. Afterwards, their stress levels had dropped by an average of 2.15 compared to 0.92 in the control group. Anxiety was measured by a scale of ranging from 20 to 80. It fell by 2.13 from 37.92 in the music group and rose by 90.91 in the control group. The music group reported an average level of 12.11 before the study and a reduction of 1.84 at the end of the 2-week period. The score was almost consistent in the control group. The music group showed significant reductions in stress, anxiety, and depression after just 2 weeks of listening to classical music. Now, I wanted to bring that up because, again, a lot of our listeners are pregnant, and they are, probably stressed, man. I mean, it's a stressful time, right? Pregnancy is beautiful, it's amazing, but we all come with our set of challenges, and I think it's something to really take note that if something such as changing your music frequency, what you're listening to, like there is a lot of like pop, right? You can listen to that, but something about music, specifically Mozart, like composers like Mozart really do change your brain frequency and just make you feel very, very different. They put you on like a different frequency. It really does make you more calm. I'm someone, as you guys can tell, suffers with a lot of anxiety, or as I have been very vocal about. And, I think listening to classical music really does reset my mind and it really just makes me feel better. It's very strange how it works, but it's fascinating and apparently it's science. So I wanted to jump into some of the benefits of classical music. Now, again, all of these benefits are pretty vague. They're pretty, they're not vague in the sense that like, oh, they're just random, but it is something that applies to all ages. So as you're listening to this, think about the benefits that would be on your children. So when you hear that, listening to classical music will help with boosting memory, right? Like somebody who can retain memory in college students. Imagine what that's going to do for your 4-year-old, especially as they're entering kindergarten or first grade or whatever have you. It really does make a big difference in the lives of our children. It just magnifies it, especially because they're small, they're developing, and kids eat this stuff up. So when you're listening to the many benefits of classical music, do put it in the lens of all stages. Even for you, I don't want this show to just be about kids. And animals. Obviously, I love kids and animals, but I'm also an adult, and I'm looking out for you parents out there, or even if for those of you who don't have kids and you're just interested in learning how to live more of a holistic lifestyle, live, more naturally, and just kind of like having less screen time and things like that. I hope this episode does, deem helpful for you, and I do hope that you probably just, turn this episode off and jam out to a Mozart album or something, after this show. So there was a really fun website that I found on takelessons.com, and it listed 10 top benefits of classical music. Now, there's actually 10 surprising benefits of classical music. Now, we will talk about this more in depth, but I did want to run through some of the benefits of classical music. Again, it's takelessons.com. Do check them out. They have a lot of really cool information on their website. So one of the benefits of listening to classical music is that it actually decreases blood pressure. Want to keep your heart healthy? According to an Oxford University study, listening to classical music can help reduce one's blood pressure. In the study, researchers played participants different styles of music, including rap, pop, techno, and classical. Classical music was effective at lowering participants' blood pressure, while rap, pop, and techno actually raised blood pressure. Now, again, we could bring this back to the fact that, you're stimulated, you're like overstimulated, right? Even when you listen to something like techno, boom, 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 like that stuff like races your heart. That's why people love listening to it when they're working out, myself included. But I will say that classical music, again, has a very organic tempo, and scientists, again, say that it does mimic your heart rhythm. So it's very interesting how that can really just, lower your blood pressure. It could really help you on an actual physical level. Listening to classical music boosts memory. According to a study, people who listened to Mozart's music showed an increase in brainwave activity that's linked directly to memory. People who heard the classical composer's music showed an increase in brainwave activity linked to memory, understanding, and problem-solving, researchers found. The researchers from Sapienza University of Rome said these results may be representative of the fact that Mozart's music is able to activate neurological cortical circuits of nerve cells in the brain related to attentive and cognitive functions. The results were not just a consequence of listening to music in general, which is very specific, that classical music, specifically Mozart, and how intricate, Mozart's incredible. So just a side note, if you're ever interested in listening to like the biography of him, of Beethoven, you really should, because it's absolutely amazing. He was an incredible genius that wasn't even, even given any kind of clout during his lifetime. People really realized how amazing he was after his passing. But the study was published in the Journal of Consciousness and Cognition. The researchers used EEG machines to record the electrical activity of the participant's brain. Now, the reason when you listen to like classical music, for example, it really does give your brain a workout. So, of course, it would make sense that listening to classical music would actually boost your memory because your brain's constantly working out. It's constantly working those functions out. So it is going to, just give you many more benefits on a brainwave level whereas like they say in other studies that pop music's just not going to. It's just very like easily digestible, not something that's really going to make your brain work for it. But when you listen to something as intricate as like Mozart or even Ludovico, who I absolutely adore, my favorite composer, it really does make you like think. It just puts you on a different level. It's absolutely fascinating. Classical music also sparks creativity. To get your creative juices flowing, listen to some classical music. While listening to classical music won't instantly make you creative, it will help put you in a more creative mindset. Next time you need to brainstorm, try listening to some Bach or Beethoven to get your mind thinking outside of the box. Now, when you think about children, they already have ball creativity, right? Like it's us adults that are a bunch of stiffs that have to do something like this to get creative. But imagine having a child constantly listen to, Mozart. I'm not just saying to have that always in the background as like white noise, but it's amazing how many benefits there are. So even if you're in the car, let's say your child's coloring, maybe do your own test, right? Maybe have a test where you give your kid a pen and paper or coloring crayons and paper and whatnot, and see what they do. See if they do something a little different. I mean, it's just interesting. You see the workout that it gives your brain. Number 4, classical music actually reduces your stress levels. If you're feeling particularly stressed, like many of us adults are, listen to some classical tunes. A study found out, again, the one that we mentioned earlier, that pregnant women who listened to classical music were less likely to feel stressed throughout their pregnancy. Scientists claim that classical music's tempo is similar to the human heart, which eases both anxiety and depression. So regardless of where you are in your life, whether you're a young child and you're having a hard time, you're just having one of those days, right? Because we all have them. Try listening to some classical music. Listen to like 4 or 5 songs. And before you listen to them, write how you feel. After you listen to them, write how you feel. I'm telling you, it's going to change at least your mood or put you in a heightened state to feel better about the situation. Especially if you're dealing, let's say, if you have your own business and you're dealing with a customer who's difficult, or you're working at a job and you're dealing with someone, maybe just popping in, some tunes, like listening to something, even if it's like nature sounds, something that's going to calm you is really going to make you feel different, and it really is going to help reduce stress. Now, in 2018, at the time of this recording, we have so many stressors, whether it be environmentally, whether it be emotionally, physically, socially. And I think something like classical music being implemented into your daily, day to day, habits is something that's really going to help, and you may see a big benefit from it. It's been said that classical music actually supercharges brain power. Boost your brain power by listening to some classical music, especially if you have a big test coming up. In a study conducted by French researchers, they had found that students who listened to a lecture in which classical music was played in the background scored better on a test compared to other students. Now, I do want to say I find this very interesting, and it was hard for me to link this study because the actual link was broken. This is an older article, but I will say that, realistically, if you're in college, let's say, and you have a seminar going on, listening to classical music and then taking the seminar in, I think that's interesting that you actually retain the information better. But realistically, a professor's probably not going to let you jam out to Bach when you're taking the lesson. But when you think about it, if you start your child at a young age and they're constantly listening to classical music, or they're listening to it pretty often on a regular basis, imagine if their brain is just developing into being able to take more and more information. It's constantly being worked out, like we mentioned a few times earlier. It's something that they're going to constantly get used to. So if they're exposed to it young, by the time they reach college level, maybe they won't even need to listen to it in order to retain the information. That's just some food for thought. Another benefit of classical music is that it helps to fight depression, similar to anxiety and depression. When you're feeling down in the dumps, ditch the donuts and opt for some classical music instead. I didn't read that before. A lot of people don't realize, but when they eat like donuts, let's say, it actually raises their sugar levels, which a lot of people would know, but they don't realize that it raises their dopamine levels at the same time. So there's always like this big circle of, when people say, oh, I feel like I'm a rat, running a wheel, right? Like, or a hamster on a wheel, with their emotions, because they're constantly fueling their pain and suffering. Let's say if they suffer with anxiety, if they suffer with depression, they're constantly eating like donuts or something, and it's raising their dopamine levels, makes them feel good for about 10 minutes, and then they crash, and it's a constant, up, down, up, down, up, down. So something like introducing classical music to your life is something that you're going to see help you on a mental and physical level, because you're not jamming in donuts, and you are getting, a more spiritual type of therapy that's not going to hurt you in the end. Several studies have proven that classical music helps to relieve depression and melancholy. In fact, a study from Mexico discovered that listening to classical music can help ease symptoms of depression. Now, that makes sense, again, because it ties into anxiety and depression, anxiety and postpartum. I do believe that they're all one and the same, because I think they're very different, but they're like brothers and sisters, you know what I mean, or like cousins. So if it's going to help one, I think you're going to have a big chance of it helping other areas as well. Classical music puts you to sleep. Do you toss and turn for hours before finally falling asleep? Rather than squeezing in another episode of Game of Thrones or New Girl, I don't know New Girl, I don't know what that is, but Game of Thrones is funny, listen to some classical music. According to a study of people with sleep issues, listening to classical music for just 45 minutes prior to bed can help improve sleep quality. Now, I know my little one, my youngest, she would have difficulty sleeping, and I would always play classical music, and she'd be out in like 10 minutes. Sometimes it would take longer. I mean, just on average, though, sometimes it would take maybe 2 minutes. It's very interesting how it soothes you. It can make you feel better. And it is something that, will help put you to sleep, because it just calms you to a state where you're able and you're comfortable to fall asleep. Classical music has been said to relieve pain. Instead of reaching for another Tylenol, you might want to consider playing Bach or Beethoven playlist. Multiple studies have shown that listening to classical music can help relieve pain. According to researchers in London, patients listening to classical music use significantly less pain medication. Now, again, you have mind over matter, right? So if you're in a better mood, if you are processing things differently, it is going to help you in pain relief. That's actually a new one, although upon researching for this episode, I did read a few studies that kind of blended the pain management in. A lot of studies that were conducted were on subjects that were suffering from dementia, they were suffering from like arthritis, or they were suffering from other different, cognitive disabilities and physical disabilities. And every single study had said there was some kind of increase, whether nominal or, exponential, with listening to classical music for certain periods of time that did help with pain management. So that's something that was new that I had never known, but it does make sense when you really do look at the data. Classical music makes you happy. So like we mentioned earlier, listening to classical music can help increase dopamine secretion, which activates the brain's reward and pleasure center. So instead of eating a bag of donuts, you can just listen to music, and it's really going to change your mood. In fact, a 2013 study found that music can help put people in a better mood. This is a big reason why I think it's important for children to be exposed to classical music, because I think when they're in a calm state, it does help to relieve tension, but also I'm sure there is some music that you guys can jam out to that's classical, and it just lifts your spirits, right? Even do a quick YouTube search and do like inspirational classical music. You're going to come across many different symphonies and melodies, and it's interesting how some can really change your moods. But the fact that classical music makes you happier, I do have to get behind, because I know for me in my personal life, it's hard for me to stay in a bad mood if I'm listening to classical music. It's just interesting. I have to really try to like be in a bad mood, which some days are, not that hard. But I will say that it definitely does change my mood and my mentality personally. Classical music has been said to improve productivity. It's a Monday morning and you can't seem to get it together. To help boost productivity, listen to some classical music. A series of studies have proven that music makes repetitive tasks more enjoyable. A study performed by researchers at the University of Maryland found that Baroque classical music in the reading room can help improve radiologist efficiency and accuracy. Now, this makes a lot of sense. I will say that if you go to like a doctor's office, a lot of times you'll hear like the radio station, but oftentimes you'll hear classical music. And another thing is that, there are more and more businesses that are coming out. I think there's a business called Focus at Will. I actually heard of it on the Jeff Sanders podcast, and it's a program it's a paid subscription program. You can certainly do that, or you can go on YouTube, whatever. But if you're looking to like study for like an exam, or you're studying, or you're doing like a big presentation at your job, they actually link up different classical music to activate different brain centers, right, in your brain. Activate different parts to like make you focus more in one area. So if, let's say, you need ideas on how to be more creative for a project, it'll give you a playlist on how to activate those creative centers. If you are looking to study for a big test coming up, it will play a certain playlist of classical music that's going to help you prepare best for your test. So it is proven, even in a business standpoint, that, playing different types of classical music is going to activate different parts of your brain, and it's going to give you a better result depending on what you're listening to. So again, that was an article that really described some of the benefits, 10 benefits to be exact, of classical music that you can take into your childhood, into adulthood. And again, I'm just going to run through those real quick. Classical music, and this is not a short list, by the way, this is 10, but there's so many more benefits of classical music on a spiritual, emotional, even religious level, right? Like churches use classical music, and there's different religions that use classical music. I mean, it's really just a beautiful thing, and it really does have so many benefits. But I'm going to run through them again, and these are just 10, but again, there's many more. It decreases blood pressure, boosts memory, sparks creativity, reduces stress levels, supercharges brain power, fights depression, puts you to sleep, relieves pain, makes you happy, and improves productivity. So if you're someone that has never jammed out to classical music, and you really want to kind of just switch things up, even from like just a mental point of view, even if you're just someone that's like, I've never done it before, let me try it, I highly, highly, highly recommend listening to some of the greats, listening to Mozart. I was going to say Mozart. Listening to Mozart, listening to Bach, listening to Beethoven, listening to some new people like Ludovico, listening to different types of composers. There's so many good ones, you guys. There's so many good composers. And I think it's really important that you just start your journey. You can go on YouTube. It's a fantastic search engine for these types of things, especially if you're new to it. You can go to classical music for studying, classical music for babies, classical music for business owners, classical music for inspiration, classical music for motivation. I mean, literally any of those you can put in, and it will bring up a whole playlist of amazing classical composers that I think you would get a lot from. So again, I'm in the camp of the Mozart effect. I do believe maybe it's not as extreme as like lifting your IQ, but if something is going to change the way that you think, change the way that you retain information, change the way that you feel, help you with depression, help you with so many different aspects of your life, doesn't that just raise your IQ life level, right? Like maybe it's not going to make you do, get like a 4.0 on a GPA or something like that, but maybe it will. Maybe it will put you in a state that you're at your best, where you can try to strive for a high score on a test, or you can, fight for that promotion because you're in a better state of mind. I think classical music's fantastic, and I think it does give you a life upgrade, and it's something that you can do for super cheap and even for free. You don't have to invest in anything crazy. I mentioned Focus at Will earlier because it's a program that I have heard of, but I have not actually bought from it. I literally just go on YouTube. I have a ton of composers that are downloaded on. I'm just using like the main ones that people have heard of, but I have so many different playlists that I have downloaded on iTunes, and I listen to it. Some of it's like super dramatic, right? Like some of the classical music can be really dramatic, but sometimes I'm feeling really dramatic and I'm feeling super extra, so I'll just jam out to it. But I highly recommend checking it out, and I definitely recommend implementing it into your children's day-to-day. Even for me, I play it in the morning, I play it at night, or not at night, but like when I pick my kids up from school, so they're constantly getting these doses of classical music in their system, and hopefully they'll reap the benefits of it. But thank you guys so much for listening to another episode of the Nature's Premier podcast. I hope you enjoyed this content that I provided for you today. If you have any questions, please feel free to email us at speaking@naturespremier.com. We absolutely love hearing from you guys. And thank you guys so much again for tuning in. Please do make sure to rate and subscribe to the podcast so more families can get this information. Thank you guys so much, and I'll check you back on the next episode. Take care, friends.